of glove. Let's start by talking about the gloves, which of course are worn just by 3 characters in the movie. And what do you think that all means?
I think as a glove movie, this is right up there with The Age of Innocence.
Yeah, that's on my list, of course.
That would be my #1 glove movie up until this one.
And what do you think? What do you think the gloves are all about?
Movie. I don't know.
I'm a dad. Jokes. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, she's handling a lot of ropes and metal things. I feel like it's
she needs the gloves. Yeah, it's out of utility.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it has to do with what I see as one of the themes of the movie, which is sort of the tension between being bound, being restricted, and being in the world and free and able to go. I mean, there's, the whole thing about gloves is they're between you and the rest of the world, but there's some amazing gloves in this movie. And another thing that I wanted to bring up is the house, which is as startling in its way as the house in Giant, in terms of being just completely kind of out of sync with its surroundings and even with itself.
There were 2 great houses in movies the year that this came out. One of them was the house in this movie, and the other one was the house in Crimson Peak, which played at Ebertfest last year. Yeah. And the greatest locations in movies are ones where once you have spent some time in them, you feel like you know them so well that you could draw a floor plan. And that's how I felt about this movie, at least during the first part of it. But then they start to do this thing. Have you ever had one of those dreams where you're in a familiar space and then you notice a door that you didn't know was there before, and you open it up and you're like, wow, I didn't know there was a whole other room back here. That's what this movie does with the house. Like, it keeps, like, you think you know the space intimately, and then it keeps revealing that there's whole wings you didn't know about.
To say nothing of the basement, but yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I felt that especially strongly in the scene where they have the suitcases and they're just sliding door and another sliding door and another sliding door.
It's interesting how in that scene and throughout the movie, it's very coordinated. Like, they get up and they get down and they open the doors together and then they sit back down. And there's meticulousness to this whole movie that is really astonishing, especially on this. This is possibly the best home to watch this kind of movie.
And the house is such a great reflection of the uncle's monstrous obsession with colonialism. I mean, it's half English, half Japanese, and it's just this strange monstrosity, sort of reflecting the way that he has, created these layers of facades for himself as sort of a Japanese gentleman. I thought that was really excellently done.
I wanted to just introduce a little element here parenthetically, which is that Park Chan-wook, before he became one of the great film directors, was a film critic. And one of the things that I have noticed, I'm certainly not the only person to have noticed about his movies, is that his movies are so much, they're so much reflecting upon themselves as they're telling you a story that I always feel like I'm kind of doing something redundant when I review his movies. I feel like he's got it covered. It's like it's built into the structure of the film. And I'll give you just a few general examples here, which is, I said in the introduction that this is a movie that is about storytelling. It's a story that is also about storytelling, but it's also about the act of creation. And I think this movie is, in addition to being this kind of wonderful film noir, sort of weird, like cross between a Rebecca Jane Eyre kind of story and something like Double Indemnity. It's also a story that is about the act of creation, and it's filled with metaphors for what it is doing as it is telling you the story. And we mentioned the architecture, but in the way that you think you know the layout of this house, but then it turns out that there are new areas that haven't been revealed yet and that you have not yet explored. Well, that's sort of like the story that you're seeing. The way that it is, different parts of the house are revealed in different perspectives is very much like the way that this is divided up. But of course, the movie works as a movie, but it's also like a book that has sections that are told through different narrators. And I mentioned this in the introduction as well, but now you know what I'm talking about. There are scenes in this movie where you see, like in the first part, you see a bit of a scene, and then the middle part of it, you see what came before that scene. And then in the end of the movie, you might see a little bit of what was at the end of that scene that you saw. And it turns out you thought you saw a scene, but you actually saw the middle of the scene. And it's all going to be filled in. And then running throughout all of this is this way that he ties together blood, violence, with sex and with creativity. And just there are a lot of moments in this movie where you don't know what you're looking at. Am I looking at an eye? Am I looking at the moon? Am I looking at paint? Am I looking at blood? Am I looking at writing? Am I looking at claw marks? You know, are they bloody claw marks? Are they sexual claw marks? Am I looking at the clouds? Am I looking at the smoke from the cigarette that turns out to be poisonous? And everything is a metaphor for everything else in this movie. And I feel like no matter how many times I see this movie, I'm going to keep coming up with new cockamamie theories to try to share with folks like you, and we want to hear some of yours as well. But you know what I'm talking about? Do I sound like a Dennis Hopper character at this point?
No.
I think I do.
Well,
Man, and then the clouds, man, they're all...
it's an endearing Dennis Hopper character, if it's anything.
Good, as long as it's not one of the scary ones. So
The most recent comparison, because watching it again, I mean, it reminded me of like Gone Girl in a way, trying to watch it and looking at the shifting perspectives. And it's amazing how well it holds up on a second pass. Because some of these movies that are changing narrative structures or you're switching from person to person, on a second go, they don't really hold up. The logic doesn't make sense. But everything follows here.
Absolutely. I've got a couple more questions, but I want you all, I know you're going to have questions about this movie and some comments, so I want you all to get ready because we're going to open it up to you. We want to hear what you have to say about it. I want to ask you what you think about the music. The music could have been from a Hitchcock film. It could have been, as you said, from Rebecca or Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights. And it was certainly very Western. And what do you think about that choice?
I was actually jumping off originally something that Katie said about the architecture being, did you say it was English and Japanese?
Yes.
Yes, well, and that's another, to me, that's another example of this movie presenting you with a metaphor or a simile for what it is. I mean, this is, as I mentioned up top, this is based on an English language novel by a Welsh novelist. And,
masquerading as a Victorian novelist.
Exactly right, and right, so there's like multiple layers of impersonation going on here. And it very much reminds me of something like Akira Kurosawa used to do this a lot. He would take Shakespeare's Macbeth and turn it into The Throne of Blood, or he would take Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest and he would turn it into Yojimbo, and then people in turn would remake Kurosawa. And Park Chan-wook is on to that, and he's in a lot of cases he's remaking things that have already been remade, and you can kind of drive yourself crazy thinking about this. But I love the rewatching factor. It's interesting you say that because I've always found that the movies that hold up the best when you watch them over and over again are ones that are funny. And they have a sense of humor, like not just the characters that are kind of funny and eccentric, but also the movie has to have a sense of humor about itself.
Yeah.
And I think this one does.
I think the best serious films are also really funny. Like they're cutting off the guy's fingers and he's reading the names of the book, and the names are bells and balls and decadent girls who sell lingerie, and they're cutting off this guy's finger. It's like a crazy disconnect.
And I feel like the funniest moment is when she hangs herself, and it made me like really uncomfortable the first time I saw it.
It is
but
horribly
the second time
funny.
I saw it here, it's hilarious.
So good.
Yeah.
Especially when she lets her go.
Yeah.
You're like, wait, what? You know, yeah.
Well, but Hitchcock was a master of that too, and you know, and I mentioned film noir, but there's that wonderful moment. Have you ever seen the Coen Brothers movie Blood Simple?
Sure.
Okay, well, there you go. I love this. This audience is the best. Yeah, Welsh novelist, woo! Yeah, but there's that moment where they're burying the abusive husband. Well, they try to kill the abusive husband out in the field, and the car won't start. You know, and like that's actually an old gag. I think he might have stolen that from Hitchcock, or I can't remember, Double Indemnity maybe. But those kinds of moments where it's just horrible, horrible horror film violence, and then there's something funny that happens, and it relieves the pressure.
Yeah. It's like a self-awareness of what's going on.
Yeah, definitely.
We see twice in the film of the very, very famous image from Hokusai, which in English is called the Dream of the Fisherman's Wife, and is called something completely different in Japanese. Other than the fact that it has an octopus in it, what do you think? What do you think we're supposed to take from that famous Japanese image?
I don't know. Maybe you have a
Do you have some
theory.
background on this?
I feel like you know the answer to this question.
No,
I mean, every Park Chan-wook movie has to have an octopus.
It's such an iconic image, and as I said, and if you go see it at the Smithsonian, they will call it The Dream of the Fisherman's Wife. But if you look at the original name, it's something like the Death of the Pearl Diver or something like that. It's a completely different story. And I don't know. I guess I think in a way. There's this incredibly voluptuous aspect to it, and it's also perhaps symbolic of the way that the young woman is being strangled by her life. Both of the young women are being strangled by their lives and surmounting it. But just is an interesting choice.
Well, there's certainly a lot of images of suffocation, of smothering, of hiding.
Rope.
Shackles, liberation. I mean, it's like one-stop shopping for Freudian symbolism.
Oh, and those fabulous, I have to mention, since my daughter is a costume designer in Hollywood, those costumes, which are awesome. Not just the Japanese versus Western versus Korean, but all those buttons and all of those ties and all of those constrictions and all of that, in addition to the gloves.
To slightly move back to the part about the fisherman's wife that you said, I thought that scene at the end was just so affecting both times I saw it, where the Suki is destroying all of the books. Yeah. It's like she's destroying like the patriarchal canon of literature. It's just so incredible. And when Hideko helps her, I don't know, as a woman, did you feel that? That was my immediate reaction when I saw that.
Oh, especially when they threw the paint on it. It's not enough that you rip it up. No. It's not enough that you slice it up. It's not enough that you throw it in the water. You got to throw paint on it. And there was something just so powerful about that image. And I think we also want to mention the incredible camera work in this film, which, where it zooms down that hall and just the framing, I thought was really stunning.
Well, Park Chan-wook is actually, this is kind of a pet obsession of mine, but a lot of modern films made in the last 20 years, commercial films, they reorient your attention by cutting, by ending one shot and beginning another one. Older movies do it often more by moving the camera and moving the actors in relation to the camera. And Park Chan-wook is somebody who's very, very good at that, at that old school way of reorienting your attention. And there aren't too many major working filmmakers right now who are also good at that. But the Coen brothers are among them, and I think Spielberg is probably the greatest master of it. And they all learn from people like John Ford, I think. But Park Chan-wook is also a skilled visual artist. He's kind of everything. I interviewed him one time, and he was doodling the entire time, and his doodles were beautiful, just absolutely beautiful.
How was the interview?
He had an interpreter, and it was interesting because I wondered why he needed the interpreter, because he kept correcting the interpreter's interpretation of what he said.
He's also a translator as well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. All right, so have we got some comments and questions? Let's hear it. Raise your hand if you hated this movie. Anybody hate the movie? No?
I think everybody who hated the movie left.
Okay. All right. So let's hear some comments and questions.
Question here to your right, towards center.
Just a little comment. You were commenting about the music, and what I noticed about it is that it was so similar to Downton Abbey's music.
Yes, it was.
They
really
just switched around the melody a little bit, but otherwise it was the same.
I definitely noticed it this time, which was the second time I saw the film, more than the first time. Yeah. I think that they're trying to evoke the same time period, even though the movie itself takes place a little later than Downton Abbey. But the clothes, for example, are more Victorian. The Western clothes are more Victorian than they are, say, the same period as those cars.
Definitely, I agree with you, although if you listen to the soundtrack, gasps are included, and also those balls at the end, they're like bells. It's interesting
and
that
we
they
remember,
sort of intersperse.
We remember the text of that scroll, the sound of the bell and the windlass sky or whatever that was. Yeah. Other comments, questions?
Yes, in the balcony to your right, in the center.
This is a question. In the history of Korea, it's a history of being overrun by larger nations, mostly because of the geographical location, one of which is Japan. And the Japanese, how should I put it? When the Japanese occupied Korea, they wanted to absolutely eradicate the culture. And one way they went about to do this was by outlawing the Korean language. So there is not much love between the Koreans and the Japanese historically. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, do you think that there is anything in particularly the betrayals upon betrayals upon betrayals within this film that has to do with the betrayals that the Korean nation experienced by Japan?
I absolutely do. I don't think it's a coincidence that the first thing we see in the film is the occupying military force, and then we, of course, see them again at the end of the film, and speaking very harshly to the children. When they have that conversation with the uncle, why do you want to be Japanese? And he, it just shows you how shriveling to the soul it is to have an occupying force. Yeah, I definitely think that was a theme.
Well, I would even go so far as to say that the story, the deeper story in here is men, the subjugation of women by men, and attempts to literally get out from underneath that. And so you talk, you use the word occupation, and I think there's an aspect in which the relationship between Japan and Korea is reflected in the relationship between men and women in this film. And it's a constant struggle to escape from and undermine and even destroy the oppressor.
Absolutely. Another question?
Yes, this question comes from this young lady here.
This is actually more some thoughts about the octopus image that you were asking about. And my thoughts when I first saw the movie were that it was just really visceral and even maybe obvious that he kept talking about keeping his bookmaking supplies secret down in the basement, but the octopus was also, like, he actually had that octopus down in the basement, and most of the inks and dyes were made from squid ink. And then even because her horror at hearing what went on in the basement, whether or not his torture of the aunt actually had something to do with literally reenacting that image, and that might be why it recurs and is so valued by the creepy book guy.
I think that's very insightful. And the black tongue, the ink and yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's a wonderful comment. Thank you.
Next question is in the balcony in the center.
Yeah, this is the first time that I'm trying to take all this in, and I think I got a lot of the pieces put together, but maybe you can help me. Was there a previous image of the blue cigarettes other than when he took the 3 white ones to smoke them all at the same time? Because I caught the opium that was planted and paid off a couple times before then, but was there a reference to the blue cigarettes that I'm missing other than what I just stated?
I specifically watched for that this time because I wondered the same thing the first time I saw it. And is there?
I will say, yes, there is, but you have to watch the longer cut of the movie.
Oh, no.
There is the preferred cut of this movie, the director's preferred cut of this movie is 168 minutes long. Not very many director's cuts are shorter, I've noticed. That
Did you hear the audience response to that?
I have not seen the director's cut, but I am told that question, among others, is answered in that. But considering that they lost 2 20 minutes from the movie, or what? How many is it? What is it? It's 100 and, how long was this cut? 144?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they cut a lot out of this movie, but I think it still makes a shocking amount of sense considering how much plot there is.
Yeah, the image that kept coming to me as I watched the film was those Russian dolls, one inside another, inside another, inside another. Yeah. Any other questions?
Anyone? Bueller?
We got one down. We got one down here, and we've got one over here, and then maybe that'll be it. Let's see.
Okay.
So several times you reference Hitchcock, and just before the reunion of the two women, it really felt like a director walked by. So my question is, does he
A what?
do-
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, director walk by?
Uh-huh.
Was that, and does he do that in all his films?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Yeah, actually, maybe. I don't know. I don't know that Park Chan-wook makes cameos in his films in that way.
I don't remember that being true. But
Not that I know of.
that was a good catch. Yeah.
I'm sure the internet knows the answer.
Yeah.
The internet always knows the
We'll have
answer.
to check that out.
Yes. One more, maybe?
We have one more question.
Question to your far right.
Okay.
Yeah, why didn't she suffer from the opium? You know, she drank both glasses of wine and it had the opium in it.
She spit it into his mouth.
She spit it into the mouth,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
So
she
she
may have
probably
had
got
some
a very
of it.
low dose.
It's a good pro tip in case you're ever in that situation.
Because he wasn't drinking. And so she got him all heated up, and then, just kind of like Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction, she spit it onto his mouth.
How clever was that, by the way? What a great move. I mean,
Those girls, they had it going on. They had a lot of time to think about.
That's not what I meant.
Well, thank you all very, very much, and we'll
Thank
see you tomorrow.
Thanks a lot.